from the depths of time. No, I just look like I come from the depths of time. It's this hard living. It's spending hours at the keyboard, tapping out news stories for us all. I do this, to entertain me first. That's the key. If it's a story that I want to read, then hopefully it just might be a story you want to read. But anyway, I digress. And that's what we do here at the Ed Greenwood Group. We digress madly in all directions all the time. 50 years ago, when I was less bearded than I am now, I created something called the Forgotten Realms. The Forgotten Realms today is a huge world setting. It has books, hundreds of books, games, game adventures, hundreds of game adventures. It has all sorts of cute little things that from bookmarks and collectibles right the way up to going to be involved in a major movie. But back then, when I was, 5 years old, I was just creating something for me. I loved reading all the books in my father's den. Fantasy books, science fiction books, mysteries, thrillers, everything. Because I read everything in the den. But most of all, I enjoyed fantasy books, either high fantasy like Lord of the Rings or low fantasy, swords and sorcery, where barbarians or two friends or somebody with a sword or a dagger wandered through the alleyways or just explored crumbling ruins and got into trouble. And reading about it was a good time. So fantasy was my first love, but a lot of the things I read, the authors were dead and gone. Or if they were writing, like Roger Zelazny's Amber books, you had to wait for the next one. You had to wait and wait and wait and reread all of the past ones and hope that the new one would crown them, and then you'd devour it, and then you'd have to start waiting again. So I wanted to write my own world, not to create something great and powerful and get published, everything, just for me, to tell my stories, to have fun, a place for my dreams, a place for my imagination to go and have fun in. And that's where the Forgotten Realms started. It's something that has carried me through my life. It's something I still work on every day. It has become a vast, detailed fantasy world in all sorts of languages all over the world, in all sorts of ways, from sitting around a gaming table, from sitting alone with a book, to leafing through a magazine, to playing computer games online or just on your own computer. It has been there for lots of people for many years. But one of the things that Forgotten Realms has done, aside from, taking over my life, has meant that I'm so busy working on it that whenever any other ideas occur to me, they either have to be really tiny and short, which usually means I'm doing them for somebody else, for a friend. Oh, sure, I'll write a book on, I'll write a short story on vampires for you. That's all I've got time for. Sure, here it is. The big ideas, the ideas I think, there's something there, we could build a big thing out of that, they would get spiked. I don't mean killed, I mean the old journalistic thing. Yeah, we actually had spikes on our desks. You could impale your hand on them. They were little sharp spikes, and you wrote something on a sheet of paper, and then you impaled it on the spike so it would be preserved there for later. It was spiked. And I was doing that for 50 years, so I had a lot of ideas. The time has come, you may have noticed, I'm turning white, where one begins to realize that one is not young, immortal, and will have all the time in the world. One begins to think, I have this bucket list of things I want to do creatively, as a writer, as a storyteller, that I want to get through before I die. Well, I'm never even going to start on this list if I don't get started on it now. So I've created something called the Ed Greenwood Group to explore those ideas. What the Ed Greenwood Group is all about is exploring settings. Space opera settings, science fiction settings, steampunk settings, horror settings, fantasy settings, both high and low, all sorts of settings, all sorts of story ideas, bringing them to you. And because I realize, having worked on the Forgotten Realms, and having waited for the next Selesny book, and having faced the fact that Selesny is now dead and there will be no more Amber books, that Tolkien is dead, there will be no more visits to Middle-earth, that one person is a bottleneck. So I want people to share in this world in the same way that many creators have shared in the Forgotten Realms. I want to have artists who are better at art than I can ever be, musicians who are better at singing and music than I will ever be, coders who can code things where I can't code anything on a computer, writers who have different voices than mine. I want everybody to have fun in all of these settings. That's what the Ed Greenwood Group is about. Stormtalons. 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 You can't read just one. Stormtalons is a medieval come Renaissance fantasy world, previously codenamed Pony Island Adventures, if you've seen any mentions of it anywhere, but it's not the same as the real Pony Island Adventures. No slight meant to that. This is not a setting about ponies, and it's not animated, and it's not for young kids. It's for everybody. And yes, there are islands, and yes, there are adventures, and I suppose there may be ponies in a few books too, but that's not what it's really about. Stormtalons is a huge, broad tapestry fantasy world. So is the Forgotten Realms, a huge, broad tapestry fantasy world. However, Stormtalons is not the Forgotten Realms reskinned. Stormtalons is deliberately different from the Forgotten Realms. It's things I couldn't do in the Forgotten Realms. Let me talk about that for a moment. You see, the Forgotten Realms was my own world for the first little while, so it has the idiosyncrasies of me as a storyteller just putting into it what I wanted to put into it. But I fell in love with the Dungeons & Dragons game, and I started expressing stuff in the realms in the form of Dungeons & Dragons. Monsters have this many hit points and can do these things. Wizardly magic works like this. Here are the spells with their area of effects and durations. This is how. So everything matched the D&D game. So I could start playing D&D in the Forgotten Realms. Eventually, the publisher of Dungeons & Dragons noticed, because I was writing articles for Dragon Magazine that kept on mentioning the realms, and adopted it as an official setting for the Dungeons & Dragons game. And what this meant was everything that was in the game, every new monster, every new magic item, every new character class, every extra planar creature, everything had to be accommodated in the realms, which was great. It meant that the world was wider than my own personal preferences and imagination. But it also meant that the world had to keep changing to reflect the game. And it also meant that what we had done in the realms on my own design choices, which was that it was high magic, there were lots of wizards running around, and there were so many spells that no one person could even remember them, the names of them I mean, let alone master them all, so you never knew what you were going to face, and the fact that there were more gods than you could shake a stick at, so once again, when you burst into a temple, you couldn't just automatically assume, oh, everything's dark, so this must be the evil lord because there is only one. Attack! You couldn't do that. You had to say, well, who is this? And what is the proper way to reverence this deity? So you had to role play. So that meant the Forgotten Realms had gods galore. We have filled large hardcover books with details of the gods, and we still didn't get what I wanted in those books in first and foremost, which was how an everyday person worships the gods and how a priest behaves. We had all the other stuff about avatars and the we didn't even get into the political aims of the various organized religions, what they do in the world in a secular fashion. So that was one thing I wanted to explore outside the realms because I couldn't explore it inside the realms. I also wanted to explore what happens in a fantasy world where magic is far more restricted. So, Stormtalons is going to be a rich, broad tapestry fantasy world in which lots of creative people take part. So you don't have to wait for the next Ed Greenwood novel, and you don't have to worry about what happens if I kick the bucket tomorrow. There will be other chroniclers of Stormtalons, and all of our other settings we're handling them the same way. But in Stormtalons specifically, it is a world in which average people do not have magic items. The average people do not even see wizards walking around. And here's why. In Stormtalons, right now, there is an archwizard. He's not a nice man. He's known as the Hierophar. And he has conquered a whole bunch of kingdoms and rules them now as the land of Scalant. And it occupies almost half of one continent. Opposing the Hierophar, on almost the other half of the continent, are the priests of Relic. There are only 6 deities in Stormtalons. There are others, but they are reflections of the 6, and the 6 are the ones that everybody knows about and venerates. The priests of Relic are law and order types, and they're really good at making sure everybody's fed and clothed. And they're also really good at control to make sure everybody's fed or clothed. So the result is something akin to a real-world Mennonite or Amish society. Everything's rural. The priests are everywhere, telling you what to do and watching over you. There's very little innovation. But they stand together in détente as a counterbalance to the Hierophar. Now, if you're using wizardly spells, and you're using them for minor things like healing your neighbor's cat, or getting rid of an infection in your own finger, or mending something minor, you will be ignored by the Hierophar. But if you step out into the street and hurl lightning down it, you will be noticed. Both the priests of Religor and the Hierophar have their spies. And if you use magic too boldly, the local hit team from the Hierophar, who obeys the Hierophar, will show up and give you this stark choice. Work for the Hierophar or die. Now, on the spot. The result of that is, unlike what we have in Dungeons & Dragons, where there are warlocks and sorcerers and wizards and everybody's running around and there's more magic than you could shake a stick at, here, magic is hidden or you don't have it. There's something else that's different from the Forgotten Realms and D&D in general. There are tropes that are associated with the D&D game, like there are haughty elves who sneer at gruff, hard-drinking dwarves who all have beards and are all X feet tall, and the two of them don't get along and everything. Well, that could be there for individuals in a story, in Stormtalons, but they are not the racial norms. Nor do we have the classic D&D setting of there are orcs and goblins everywhere. Well, what we have here is, at least when we first see Stormtalons, it's almost all the humans. The elves and dwarves, yes, they live among humans everywhere, but where they really flourish is in the mists. The mists? Ah, the mists, that's where the name Stormtalons comes from. The Stormtalons are mists that persist. Unlike mists that are banished by the sun in the morning, these are permanent cloudlands that exist on the ground. And people who go into the mists usually don't come out again. Sometimes they fall prey to monsters. Usually they just get lost, because navigating reliably in the mists is almost impossible. A few people have devised it, but... And the mists are also where monsters prowl and lurk, and they come out of the mist to raid and back again. The mists do not stay in any one place reliably. They ebb and flow, so sometimes they swallow entire kingdoms. And they also make moving around the world, except by ship, somewhat chancy. Stormtalons has dragons, yes, but they aren't the D&D dragon types that you're used to. Stormtalons dragons are of two sorts. Brutes. Those are the ones we see most now, and they live in the mountains, particularly in Nornar. And they can be fought, they can be eaten, or they can be tamed as steeds, although it's not an easy or dangerous thing. And they fly, yes, aerial steeds. The other sort of dragons are known as the sleeping dragons, because they slumber under the earth, so legend has it. When the sleeping dragons wake, or when the dragons wake, it's all over. Yes, I suppose Game of Thrones has come along to give that same sort of trope, but this is different. It's not like the dragons are going to wake up and destroy everything. The thing about the dragons is, according to the legends in the world of Asmer, which is the world of Stormtalons, all magic came from these mighty dragons, the ones that sleep. They are the embodiment of magic. And one of the things they're probably going to do is run into conflict with anybody trying to control magic or use magic to control large groups of people. And that would fit both the Hierophar and the priests of Religor, which means big change is coming to the world. And that's why our Stormtalon stories begin now. I love the idea of a world like this. You are getting in at the beginning of what is going to become a vast, rich, detailed fantasy world. We're going to write Stormtalons books, just as we are going to write books in our other settings put forward by the Greenwood group that are always going to stay available. And we're going to keep going. So you're going to have years of books to dip into. This doesn't mean that you have to, tear open your wallet and mortgage the house and everything, because all these books are coming out right now. And if you don't buy them, they'll be gone. So it isn't like the traditional publishing where the book arrives on the bookstores, and if you don't buy it in that week, it's gone. And something else is in its place. No, these books will stay available in a variety of formats forever. So if you like them, and you pass one to a granddaughter or a grandson, and they like them, they will be able to get their hands on all of the books that you enjoyed without your having to part with your copy, or without anybody having to search through used bookstores or junk stores for moldering copies. They are always going to be available. And what we're going to do is tell ongoing stories in all these worlds. I've planned story arcs. These are main plot points that lie behind the individual stories that you'll be able to enjoy. Not every story has anything necessarily to do with the ongoing story arc, but we do have a planned history for most of these settings that will unfold over literally years. So the world will be going somewhere. It isn't just, what can I think of next to throw into my latest Stormtalons book? No, there will be ongoing story arcs. They are plotted out. They are plotted out for almost the next 20 years, which is why, the primary reason why we have the Onderlibrum website. It's for you to say, hey, I want more of this, or hey, will we ever get to see this character get married to that character and do something? We will pay attention to all those things. It doesn't mean that we will necessarily do exactly what you hope we will do with a particular character, but it does mean that we're listening. And that if enough of you want something, you may get it. Be careful what you ask for. So, that, in a nutshell, is Stormtalons. So you will get to see all over the world of Stormtalons. And you will get to see books in other languages by creative people who are literally located all over the world. This is going to be big. And it's going to be something that is going to be as rich or richer than the Forgotten Realms, because a whole bunch of people will be contributing to it, not just me. And I hope you will fall in love with Stormtalons, and I hope you will see how cool it's all going to be, and how friendly and welcoming it's all going to be, so you can fall in love with it and visit it again and again, and we all have have a new place for our imaginations to play. Thank you. Thank you, and good night.